Thank you all for joining us and kicking the afternoon off so well. Can we wade straight in? I'd like to start by asking you all what we need to do to implement decarbonisation in the light of the ambitions that we've seen in the DfT's transport decarbonisation plan, just putting our teeth back in, and from Network Rail and National Highways. I'm just wondering, Kim, if you can start us off, if you would.
Okay, so we're seeing a hell of a lot of ambition in the net zero world. And I think we've heard this all the way through today's conference in terms of everybody has a part to play. It's not just us in the rail industry, it's working with the energy sector, it's working with actual manufacturers as well. And it's that interlinking of the skills, the energy, and it's a very, very complex thing to try and answer. So we have a way forward. We're all waiting for what comes out of COP26. Hopefully there will be some really good answers there. There'll be, again, that template for setting the way forward. But I suppose in terms of overall net zero, it's not a simple answer, as you're probably getting very, very clearly.
I know, it certainly isn't. And just your thoughts, Kim. I mean, you know, COP26 has been all over the news and over the last couple of weeks. How optimistic are you feeling?
I'm waiting till the end of the week. But actually, yes, we have a lot of momentum going forward. At government level, yes, they are all talking. Yes, they are all making pledges. But actually, I think it's us on the ground that make the real difference. So yes, you can have the legislation there, it sets the way forward. But what we can do in terms of my role in a consultancy, what we can do as clients, what we can do across the board, I think that is what is actually going to count. It's more action rather than words, I think, is coming across loud and clear.
We don't need sound bites anymore, do we?
No more.
Sue, do you want to continue there? Kim was talking about collaboration, which is obviously important, but what else is key?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, it's looking at the whole sort of integration of transport. And given that transport is the biggest emitter of carbon at 34%, we are in the spotlight and we've got to step up to the plate and we've got to do this and cut emissions by 50% by 2030. So that's just over 8 years. So if we're in transport, in rail or road or aviation, this is a huge challenge and one that we've really got to pick up and move quickly with. So we've been looking at this and working with Baroness Brown, who is the chair of the Carbon Trust and also a previous deputy chair of the Committee for Climate Change. And one of the things that she has asked us to focus on and work with the transport sector is around carbon literacy, because there's lots of other things that you can pick up, but it's quite clear that we actually really need to get our carbon literacy with those working in transport at a higher level than it is at the moment. And it has to be ongoing as well. And so we're sort of developed sort of, I suppose, 3 steps for this. First step is to make sure we understand the scale and the pace of change that is necessary to decarbon transport, whether that's the rail sector, road or aviation. And it's going to have to be transformational. It's not going to be around the edges, it's going to be fundamental and centre. The second step that we're looking at is really about how we make sure that we all have a basic or foundational level of understanding of climate action that's necessary. So we speak the same language, and within that, things that we'll need to make sure that we all understand are things like basic science, what the Committee for Climate Change and others tells us that we must do, what new policy, regulation, legislation we're going to have to work with, and making sure we understand the language and terminology we're using. So do we all know when we're talking about net zero what that means, or carbon neutral, or scopes 1, 2, 3 emissions? And this third step is really then evaluating our own professional needs for the roles that we do, and really identifying what other skills we need to acquire to be able to deliver what we do, and really dedicating the time to that, and for our employers to make sure we've got the space and the time and the resource behind us to be able to make sure that we have the skill set to deliver over the next 8 years. So for me, it's really about pace of change, transformation, and making sure that we've got actually a base level of carbon literacy as a transport profession.
I've never actually heard the phrase carbon literacy, and it absolutely makes sense. James was nodding away through most of your answer there. I mean, James, please expound on what the panellists have said so far, but also can you explain how this might help with Build Back Better?
Yeah, so from a government perspective, where government can help with the implementation of this, I think ultimately is about fostering a spirit of shared enterprise. Because you're going to have so many different sectors and peoples saying, what has this got to do with me? And it's for government to explain that and to actually telegraph that sense of consequence about what happens if we don't. So kind of the ultimate business case really is that it's cheaper and as well as being better to save the planet than stand back and let it go to ruin. And I think there's so many dots that need joining up, and that's where government needs to step in.
Elaine, you're at the end of the panel, certainly not least on our panel. Your thoughts to kick us off on this discussion?
Yeah, I think two key things for me. From a supply chain perspective, I think we need to be allowed to get on with it. So as Kim said a few minutes ago, the words are great. We now need to get on to action, and that action needs to be driven by government, because that's where a lot of our funding comes from. So I think the Minister said before lunch the IRP was coming imminently. Yeah, we need it to be here, we need to see what's in it. Whatever's in it we can then work with. Whatever isn't in it, at least we then know. But I think from a supply chain we just need now some commitment from government, following on from COP, to really enable us to get on with the big task from a decarbonising the railway perspective. But I think there's another angle as well. Because it's very easy to say, well, can we have ILP, can we have enhancements, can we have? I think we also need to take responsibility ourselves in our own businesses. So all the businesses here today, regardless of what is in government spending going forward for the railway, that will help your businesses, it'll help my little business somewhat, but actually we can all take action within, and we all need to take action within our businesses. So again, picking up from what Sue was saying, do we understand our carbon footprint? Do we understand what we need to do as businesses? And let's, as a supply chain companies, start to take a lead and actually demonstrate to government and to others what we can do to actually get it moving.
Yeah, I think you're right. And how did you feel so far from what we've seen from COP26? How optimistic are you about what will actually come out at the end of it?
I think I'm probably with Kim. I'm waiting to see a little bit. I think Prime Minister said a few days ago it's 1 minute to midnight. It can't be 1 minute to midnight for much longer. And that's not just a rail comment, it's a broader comment. I'm not sure that the general public has a great deal of confidence, but that's about the big political scene. So again, I think, yeah, we're waiting to see. Hopefully there is that momentum, and I think all of us in this room have a role to play in keeping that momentum going, and not actually, you know, if it doesn't happen in the way we would like to see it, that we all keep pressing and keep that momentum up.
And I think, Helen, a key thing about COP26 is this is a ratcheting effect, and it's part of that. You know, compared to where we were in Paris in 2015, so much has happened in terms of, for example, massive coal projects not getting funding, a change of approach from banks to funding, polluting industries. It's not going to kind of be a case of when the party finishes in Glasgow and somebody says, oh, everybody goes home, that's it. It's going to carry on. And this is all part of a ratcheting effect. And even when somebody talks about, well, what about China? What are they doing? The fact that they're actually conversing with the United States.
That was a big step, wasn't it?
That's a big step.
Yeah.
And people might say, well, you know, they're not they're a bit behind the pace compared to other countries. But then China's economy is very different. I mean, one of the interesting things is it's building a huge solar farm in its western desert that's bigger than anything on the planet. So it's doing a lot of great stuff. So I think we just have to be mindful of all those things which maybe not be making the headlines, but which are driving this agenda forwards.
Great. Kim, how does the green agenda and decarbonisation impact the levelling up agenda that is talked about so much now and has been talked about this morning at the conference?
I think the green agenda and Build Back Better, etc., is helping the levelling up agenda tremendously, because it is a great opportunity for enhancing the skills that we have, the green skills that we have. I know this morning that we spoke an awful lot about skills and improving those skills all the way through. So I think it's a great opportunity. Certainly what I'm seeing in Teesside with the hydrogen hub, this is new technology. It's right at the front there for green hydrogen. And again, the North is leading in this space at the moment.
Tell us a bit about it, because there's a lot of good work going on there, isn't there, in that field?
Yes, so there's, it's industrialised, and it has the uses already in place for hydrogen. And what I have seen, I've only looked at it from the master planning side of it, is it's a great example of what I spoke about before, is not working in silos, but planning right at the beginning for a hydrogen hub where you're going to use it in transportation, where you're going to use it for industrial uses, and also having the renewable energy there to make that green hydrogen in the first place. So it's taken specialists, companies from all different sectors, mesh them together to actually come up with a real proper answer for decarbonisation. And that is the whole point of this, is it's not the rail industry, it's not the highways industry, it's not the water industry, it's all of us working together and sharing that learning and bringing in all those various views to actually make this happen. And it is literally the only way it happens.
And is that working well, do you think, Sue? Are you seeing dialogue between different industries to try and make it all happen?
I'd like to say yes, but I think we are still siloed. Particularly if you look at transport, in terms of both policy, decision-making, regulation, it's still quite siloed. There are some moves to try and integrate it more across the board, but we need to work hard on that to actually to make that happen. But in terms of the green agenda and levelling up, I mean, transport is absolutely fundamental and key to unlocking communities to be able to have a really good standard of living and quality of life. It can deliver on the environment and it can deliver for the economy, but it can only do so if we look at it in an integrated way and that it's accessible for all. And I think the point, whether it's rail or road or anything like that, is it's about how we bring these things together and how we use the skill sets to do that. And we must sort of move away from just a technocentric approach to how we think about levelling up, to also around a people-centred, a place-based approach to levelling up as well, of which sustainable transport is absolutely fundamental to unlocking a lot of the sort of social economic issues that we are challenged with, as well as the sort of health issues. Because if you look at the budget that's a few weeks ago, you've got a clear indication there on active travel, so much more money going into walking and cycling, so we're going to see a reallocation of highway space away from cars to that and to micro-mobility, so all those micro-mobility scooters dashing around, but also buses. There's a big programme of money going into there, let alone rail. So I think, it's for us to play for sustainable transport, and really sort of the hierarchy is avoid, that's really reduce as much as we can our need to travel by a carbon-intensive means, and rail's a really good sort of alternative to that. Modal shift, get people out onto the rail system and also into cycling and walking, and then improve. And that really is about where we do still have carbon intensive ways of transporting, that we improve that through electrification, hydrogen, etc. So it's really about making sure that when we look at levelling up, whether it's a coastal, depressed coastal area, very rural area, that we're not doing it in a way that is car-centric, and that we really build in a sustainable transport system to meet both the green agenda, the skills agenda, and sort of allowing communities and the economy to grow and flourish.
Elaine, do you want to pick up on levelling up being people-based and place-based?
Yeah, I think as I think Kim was saying, if you look at this in the round, the hydrogen requirements, the infrastructure that's required, it's not in one place, it's going to be in lots of places. And we've got whole new industries that need to be developed in this, not just in this country, but across the globe. I was listening to someone speak not long ago about the upgrades that are required to the national grid to cope with the increased amount of electricity that we will need. That is going to be, not in one bit of London, it's going to be across the whole of the nation in lots and lots of different key strategic places. But I think there's another angle, which is the people and the skills angle. I was really lucky yesterday to be in Glasgow, just for the day. And as I was coming off the hydrogen train and waiting to go onto the battery train, there were a group of school children, and they were quite young school children, they were junior school age, that were going onto the Hydroflex train. And they were absolutely super excited to be out visiting this new train, which is hydrogen ready. And if you look at some of the social media from the school and the children after that event, where they got to go for a ride on this new train, I think it gives us a clue to what really, really will switch on young people. And we, as an industry, talk all the time about the fact that we've got a skills shortage now, we've got a bigger skills shortage coming, what can we do to attract more young people into the industry? And without necessarily playing the sustainable energy transport card, we do need to play that we have a really important role in sustainability going forward, and young people coming into the industry can make a real difference and have a fantastic career making that difference. So I think there's a massive opportunity there for us as an industry to really grab that.
I'd have been excited on a hydrogen train. I think that sounds very exciting.
Absolutely. There were probably, I would guess, there were about 7 or 8, maybe, looking at the sort of height of them as they were running up.
Go on, Tim.
But they were absolutely enthralled.
And that's why Forum Midlands and BEIS and a lot of other businesses involved with rail support Primary Engineer, which is all about getting engineers into the classroom at primary school and encouraging all children, regardless of gender, ethnicity, to develop that appetite and ability to solve problems for engineering. So it's that kind of thinking about it very early on to encourage kids to think, hey, there's a career here. And what better hook than to say, come on, let's try and save the world together.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff, actually. James, just sticking with you, is the policy framework there, do you think, at a national and international level?
You're not going to be able to row back on what's happened already. And what you've got is a certain political certainty. So whenever the next general election is going to be, whichever political party is going to be in power, there's not going to be any rowback. So in a way, industry and society has a certain kind of, okay, we know what the direction of travel is. I think there's just something about being, all of us, whether in government or industry or in our personal lives, not only taking responsibility, but also having a sense of humility about the mountain that we've got to climb together, because there's going to be things that go wrong, there's going to be things which have unintended consequences, and we just have to learn from what's worked and remember what hasn't and use that to inform future decisions.
Kim, before we move on, do you want to add anything?
I suppose it's just following on from James, is that we've got to nibble away at this rather large problem that we have, climate change. It is on its way, and it's here. I suppose I'd like to refer back to when you're doing first aid training or anything like that, and you come to an emergency scene, the worst thing that you can ever do is just do nothing and stand back. You can't make the situation too much worse, but you can get in there and do what is within your capability.
What's the role, Kim, of the supply chain, and especially with regards to promoting innovation and also SMEs?
So certainly, I mean, if you just go upstairs, there are some great examples for decarbonisation that are, I suppose, cheaper than the normal solutions, but they actually save the carbon. With all my dealings with supply chain in my own company, etc., everybody wants to do something, but they need to have that environment that you can actually promote an innovation. The standards need to be there, and also the contractual procurement routes need to be there. In fact, I was on the phone this morning to one of our contractors, and he was saying, yeah, in the water sector, I hate to quote this, some of our best profits have been in the water sector where we haven't actually built anything, because they have the pain gain mechanism, lump sum. So they've been paid not to build something, because actually they've come up with another solution where you didn't have to build in the first place.
Got a question from the floor, just to follow on from that, Kim. What types of actions can smaller SME businesses take to still play their part in the overall green targets?
So SMEs have a real role to play, because SMEs are much, much more agile than us big lumbering companies, is that you can make that decision to go low carbon. So I'm going to go for a highways example now.
Yeah.
Again, white lining down the middle of the road. A small SME has come up with a low carbon solution for that. They haven't had any pull from National Highways or anything like that, but because the gentleman in charge has just gone, yes, okay, we want to do something that is low carbon, they've invested in it, and it's there, and it's ready to use, and that's without all the legislation, all the policy. People are amazing creatures, and we do come up with some really, really good ideas.
Sue, do you want to add anything to that before we move on to my next thought for you?
Yeah, just very briefly, totally agree with what Kim's been saying, but I think, you know, net zero and sort of the carbon challenge is characterised with so much uncertainty and complexity that on the one hand you can sort of see that as a challenge, but it's a huge opportunity for particularly SMEs to bring forward innovation. And I think to make progress, and certainly looking more from the highways sort of side of things, where it's very dispersed across the supply chain, we really need to align around a number of outcomes rather than just trying everything all the time, but really align and try and identify those outcomes, those innovations, and not get focused on managing and surviving a load of traditional transactional sort of relationships, where we sort of push the risk down from the client to the main contractor and further down. So there's something really around the sort of procurement and risk management, I think, that really could liberate and really help to drive more innovation in. And I think the other thing is around the margins, and certainly I'm not so familiar with rail, but with roads, the margins for the supply chain are so small, really, really small, that actually getting innovation in is quite difficult when you're operating on such small margins. So I think there's things that we can do to support innovation, but certainly there's something around, you know, that relationship and risk base and where that lies, and as well as looking at how we can support innovation where margins are very tight.
So where you are, you're long-time champions, I suppose, of place-based approaches to transport planning. I mean, what role do better places have in the decarbonisation debate?
Well, I mean, better places and place-based thinking is absolutely key, because we've had a tradition over the last few years of zoning, and so we live somewhere, we work somewhere else, and our kids go to school somewhere else, and then we want to go and go maybe to the theatre. And all of that is based around, we've been developing towns and cities based on the car primarily. And if you look at all new developments, the research shows that they are car dependent. And so place-based thinking really is around actually how you embed sustainable transport right from the start, right from the planning in the local plan or the regional plan or further above that, to actually make sure that it's not all based on car, that you have different approaches, you can have different modes of transport. But that also isn't just about technology, it's about behaviour change, and that's you and I needing to think differently about how we get about. And there's lots of discussion about the 15-minute city, around having things within a 15 minutes of a radius so that you can get to them. Anything beyond that, people will automatically jump in a car and tend to use that. So there's a huge amount going on, looking at how we can have a place-based approach. And we can do that, and we would have to work with a new department for levelling up and housing and communities, as well as the Department of Transport, and across all those other areas where transport and planning lie, which again is a hugely siloed area, and bringing those things together so we have a better understanding of what we're trying to achieve. So let's decide what we want and then provide for it, not predict and provide, but really decide, have a vision, and then start delivering on that if we want to actually achieve net zero.
James, I've got a question for the floor, but before I ask it, do you want to just add to what Kim and Sue have already said there?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the role of SMEs, it's absolutely crucial. And I think one of the interesting things that BEIS supported was back in, I think, 2017, when it provided about 28 million to set up the UK Rail Research Innovation Network. And crucially, industry stumped up about 64 million. And that brought universities together, but it wasn't only just bringing the boffins together, it was really there to say, okay, how can we help take the wonderful ideas that SMEs generate and help them cross that valley of death, to commercialise them.
Yes.
Because we've got so many examples in this country's history of great ideas, but in terms of making the most of it commercially, some other country does it. Why can't it be us? And I think what was interesting, I think back in September, I visited Doncaster because UCRIN launched a technology and innovation hub at Unipark Rail's building in Doncaster to really be there to help those SMEs in that part of the world kind of get that advice to say, right, we've got this great idea, but to have that advice and guidance to steer them over that valley of death. And that's the kind of support we need to do.
Is Valley of Death your phrase for it? Or is that a technical term, Valley of Death? I like that. That could stick.
I've heard industry contacts use it, and I loved that because it kind of paints a picture, doesn't it?
It does. It sums it up very nicely. I mean, Elaine, Sue touched there, behavioural change. How do we encourage that?
I think I think that the key word is always leadership. There's a lot of focus obviously with today around location, but I think a key thing is leadership. We've all got a role to play in that, we were talking earlier about that carbon. So what was that word? Literacy. So how do we really understand what impact we're having? So I think there's a bit around leadership. There's a bit around really understanding what you can do and what what can make a difference. I think that I would sum it up as that, really.
Kim, how can we work better in public-private partnerships and promote the collaboration? That word always comes up so many times. How can we promote that better, do you think?
So I think we've actually heard quite a lot of this all the way through today.
It's a theme, isn't it, that keeps recurring?
It's been a running theme all the way through, is this collaboration and public-private partnerships. That's an awful lot of P's in there. It is about us working together. It's about the government helping to facilitate those public-private partnerships. I have never, sorry, no pressure, James. I have never met anybody who didn't want to do the right thing and didn't want to address climate change. So it is again about setting up that environment to make it thrive. Also, with the public-private partnership, it's having that long-term certainty of this is the direction that you're heading in, because I know we all work to government cycles that switch every few years. That isn't helpful to actually getting you in the right direction. So it comes back to that collaboration again.
I think we have a few seconds left each, and I think we'll end on quite a fun question from Samuel, if that's okay. And maybe, Sue, you can kick us off. Could the panellists give the audience a single point on what personal change we need to make to be better to the climate?
Ooh,
So
gosh,
business
an
hat
interest-
off.
Yes.
I could give you my answer.
To be better for the... Sorry, can you say that?
So,
again?
so
Sorry.
he's asking if you could all give a single point on what personal change we could all perhaps make to be kinder to the climate. So I'll give you mine. Mine is the supermarket. I've got to stop buying bananas in plastic and refuse to buy avocados if they're in a tray and not loose and all that kind of thing. And I think that doesn't sound very much, but our
You know,
recycling is far
avocados-
too high, and I'm not convinced it gets recycling.
Really carbon intense.
Yeah, they don't need to be in a
No.
in a
And so
cardboard or plastic.
I've already stopped doing those. For me, it would be not jumping in my car, making sure that I cycle more or walk more or use public transport much more, use the buses, the trains to get around, and not just automatically think, oh, it's easier to be in the car. So cut down my car use and maybe use it once a week only.
Elaine, what are you doing to make a difference?
I think I would go with the same. I'd ask everybody in the room who drove here today. I'm not going to actually put your hands up, but who drove here today who could have actually come on the train? So hopefully the majority came on the train. So I think it is about really challenging ourselves to use public transport where we can. And not just public transport and buses, but also the exercise that you can take in terms of cycling, walking, etc. I think from a personal point of view, it's probably something similar to yourself, Helen. It's that let's not buy all the fruit and veg that's in the packaging. Let's go for the paper bag. And I have actually stopped using plastic bags altogether at home. So we used to have the bag for life that you paid 5p for or whatever it was. It doesn't actually last for life. It lasts for longer than the cheaper versions. But I've actually moved away from those completely now and gone to proper bags for life. So all those little things help.
James, what are you up to at home that makes a difference?
I am trying to apply severe pressure on my wife to turn the central heating off more regularly.
How's that going?
Skinflint.
I keep buying us jumpers, but I'm still struggling. But I think there is something about, there's a cultural element, a massive cultural element. I mean, just look back in the days when people used to smoke in cinemas. I mean, you look back at that now and you think, that's crazy. And there is something about just that kind of, that gentle ratcheting effect of what is acceptable and what isn't. And that we're all going to kind of have our blinkers on and be hypocrites. But we are going to try and do the right thing, and a lot of the time we will. And when we don't, I think there just has to be that collective, okay, how about just doing it a different way? And just that kind of collective push on, because there's only one direction, and it's heading net zero by 2050.
And Kim, you've got the final thought.
Final slot. I've always been kind of fanatical on reducing my personal carbon footprint. So I think it is reducing going in the car, I hate to say. Because I live in the middle of nowhere. I do have a bus that goes past me. But one of the things that's preventing me from doing it as much as I would love to is that the connection between my bus and the train, when I get to the train station, I have to wait for an hour. But across the world, I've lived in Germany, Australia, etc., and I've never had that issue. I can get to a train station, it's there within 5 minutes.
It's a real change in mindset, isn't it? And that was a really nice question, Samuel, to end on, a little bit out of the box, and really interesting. So thank you very much. Fascinating to talk to you all, and time is against us, I'm afraid. We're done. Thank you very much.